creative minds. So this is supposed to be an interaction of creative minds. I'm lucky and I'm privileged to have the co-curator of the show in Tunde Apollanya Famous. They drove all night from North Carolina because he left an exhibition he has there just to be here to feel the energy of what he started. So with joy, we want Famous to speak to us, and in turn, Famous, if I could just ask you to introduce the few artists that are here to say something. And finally, sorry, I should pass it to Deborah. I apologize. Deborah will introduce you. I'm speaking to...
No, it's okay. It's
sorry.
Okay.
Deborah Crable will be moderating the show for us, and from there it will flow.
No,
sorry, Deborah.
No, it's okay. It's okay. This is my brother. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I am truly honored and privileged to be here with you today. And when my brother extended the invitation, I said, I'll gladly will come and MC. That's what I heard. And then last week, I finally heard the word moderate. So I called him back nervously. I said, Dio, I don't know anything about Nigerian art. I'm not so sure if I'm the best person to moderate. And he insisted. And I said, okay, well, it might be a brilliant move, because sometimes it is the uneducated questions and the ones that aren't well-versed that are the best ones. Those are the dumb questions that the high intellectuals are afraid to ask, but they know they need to be asked. So that might be what will happen today. And then, of course, the real brilliance is the conversation that we'll be able to engage about the artwork that is on display here. I had the privilege of walking through here last evening, I must say, that seeing it here under the light facing the east that I was so concerned about being able to do today really gives it another level of vibrancy and excitement. So again, I extend greetings to each and every one of you today on behalf of Africa International House, which is one of the co-sponsors, and where I had the privilege of first meeting my brother Dio with the African Festival of the Arts, and now celebrates its 25th year, Labor Day weekend here in Chicago and Washington. And of course, the festival really launched in celebration of the great artworks by African artists and African American artists. So it is something that we really revere and hold very near and dear and celebrate every year as part of the festival. So for us to take a look at the great work that we see around us, I would just like to pause for one moment and just give thanks and gratitude for being subjects, each and every one of us, of the great canvas of our Creator, who has allowed us to be here today, and to really applaud those artists who take that art and that skill and that gift and share it with us with great abundance. Let's give all of our participating artists a round of applause and acknowledgement. So without further ado, Brother Tunde Famous, I yield to you to offer further accolades to our artists.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tunde Apollanya Famous. It's a pleasure, to be here. I'm not going to preach much. Just to give you an idea, a brief, history of how this exhibit came into being. A few years ago, I called Dio, about the idea of contemporary Nigerian artists in the U.S. Coming together and exhibiting our work. Because when you look around, here in the United States, very little or not much is known about what is happening in the contemporary art scene coming from Africa. A lot is known about the traditional sector. And I thought it's a great idea for us to start, creating opportunities to educate, create a platform to educate American, art communities about what is happening in the art world in Africa, specifically in Nigeria. And I placed a phone call to our mentor, Professor Dr. Billy Degede, about introducing, the same concept to him, and he came through with encouraging words. He said, "This is great. Yeah, this is great." I said, "Well, let's do it." And in reality, it's very complex and very difficult getting artists, to come together. You have all these alter egos and all kind of challenges in the art communities. We've been trying for about 7 years, but finally, this year it is, happening. That we just have to get it off the ground, and that is why we're here, today. Vision, epitomizes that, effort to present the work of contemporary Nigerian artists resident in the United States to the American, society. And 12 artists are featured in this, exhibit. A few of us are, here. I will at this time like to introduce some of the artists. If you're here, could you please raise up your hand and introduce yourself?
GDLG from Detroit, Michigan. Mkaila Yoadi from Chicago.
Oh, sorry, Dario from here.
Okay. And Tunde, from North Carolina.
Oh, Naba. Very good. Hi.
Okay. Thank you very much. And, particularly, I want to seize this opportunity, to thank our professor, Dele Jegede, for being here with us. I know he has a lot of things he will have been doing with his time, but he considered this very, very important, to be here. Sir, thank you. Thank you. We appreciate your support. Come on, give me a round of applause. And today also we have a scholar of African art and visual culture who teaches at University of Wisconsin, the Superior, campus. Olawole, family. He's responsible for writing, some of the essays in the capital. So thank you very much. And without any further, ado, I think we begin the process of celebrating this excitement, here. I want to thank you, for being here, today. We appreciate, your presence, and kick it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I would simply like to bring to the fore our keynote speakers and our very honored guest today, Dr. Jigade. Again, we welcome you to the table, and we have Dr. Tololupe Fulani. I probably did not say your first name correctly. Okay. Professor of Art, South Carolina State University, who's here all the way from South Carolina.
But he's not here.
He is not here now? Oh, okay. So...
Yeah, Famile is here.
Dr. Famile is here.
Dr. Famile. Oh, okay. Dr. Famile, from the Professor of Art and Visual Culture, University of Wisconsin. We welcome you as well. And Dr. Famile is doing a book on my brother Dio, and is doing a series of interviews, and so just know that is a process that is going on and an outcome of today's event as well.
Professor Parker. We have Professor Parker on the table. Sorry. We didn't know you came.
Oh, Daniel Parker?
Yes, please.
Oh, Daniel Parker, okay. From Diaspora Rhythms is joining us, professor at Chicago State University here in Chicago. World-renowned collector. I'm not so sure if I know anybody in the universe who has more art than he does. And he can tell you funny stories about how he has to hide and sneak art in the house from himself. I'll just hide it in the trunk and I'll get to it later and pretend I really didn't buy it. But in fact, he has. So let's give all of our panelists another round of applause. I would just like to get our conversation started. And feel free, and we'll take questions from you as well. So feel free, we want this to be interactive and a conversation. And just in terms of the art, we're talking about contemporary Nigerian art being a reflection of who we are today. Oftentimes it is said that through our art we are able to get a reflection of who we are in any form of art. It's another platform for us to understand our history, where we have been. It lets us know who we are today and maybe make some other choices based on what we're able to present through our art. It also gives us a lens to project into the future where we might go, how we might articulate the next phase of our lives. not just as individually, but even as a whole community, as a race of people. I would like to start with you, Dr. Jigade, with that whole notion of what art does. What does it actually speak to in terms of where we've been, who we are, and where we might be going?
I think I like this introduction. You know what that just did? It kind of freed me from all of these notion of reading from prepared text. So, I like that because it broaches issues that I think are very important to all of us. In very broad terms, when I say that art is a very physical manifestation of fugitive ideas, of non-graspable ideas. Art really crystallizes those things that we have in mind, thoughts that exist in mind that you cannot physically hold on to. Love, as an example. I've never seen anybody say, oops, this is love, I'm holding it. No, it manifests itself in a variety of ways. Love is infinite. You love your wife in a way that's different from the way you love your children, the way you love your pets, the garden, the weather. Art is something like that. Art is also something that sometimes you cannot explain. Even the artist himself struggles occasionally with what art is. You see a canvas, it becomes a battleground. And you go to battle and you probably had an idea when you started. And the canvas tells you, or the piece of sculpture, this is where I want to go. And you let it be. And so art is, it's a question that I keep asking everybody, what is art? It is something that seems very simple, at the same time very complex. I'm yet to find any definitive kind of answer to that question. But when it comes to narrativization of art, when it comes to categorization of art, we do much better in that area. And that's why we say this is, we even say contemporary art. We say contemporary African art, contemporary Nigerian art, art of the African diaspora, art of the African American peoples. We do much better. Why? Because as art historians, for example, we do not like, there's nothing we like better than pigeonholing. We like to compartmentalize. If it has not been labeled, we will label it. Yes. We have to be able to impose some kind of order on things. We have to do that so we can slot it in some kind of cabinet, probably, put it away. And so it comes to what we also are looking at. We may have reason to come back to that down the road, but let me segue to the issue that I think is very important because it animates why we are here today. The issue of migration, talking about the diaspora, particularly the African diaspora. The idea started as the Nigerian diaspora. We're talking about the African diaspora, issue of migration, transnationalism, and the black diaspora. And critical to all of this is that of migration and emigration. All of us who are here exhibiting today, all of us, came from Africa, from Nigeria, first generation. It's remarkable that this is happening. In the 1980s, when I was finishing my dissertation at Indiana University, I was lucky because it didn't take long for my advisor to allow me to focus on contemporary Nigerian art, because there was nothing like that in this country at that time. It was more about African art. And African art was meant to kind of be the catch-all for all that is quote-unquote traditional.
Can I pause right there
Sure.
so we can just get a distinction between the traditional African art versus contemporary?
Right.
And I welcome other panelists to jump into the conversation as well. When we start talking about labels, is that a European westernized construct that flies in, that is incongruous and not supportive of a black aesthetic coming from an African traditional perspective that is probably more open and does not deal with all of those type constructs and definitions and need to label?
Okay, I think we need to acknowledge one other factor, that the study of the art of the African diaspora, to a large extent, is a European construct. That is something that we have to acknowledge. Many of us, when we came in the 70s, 80s to study here, I was surprised that the things that I was being taught as a graduate student were things that I had grown up with at home. The only difference was that I didn't know that you would have to put these things in some kind of neat compartment. So the idea, therefore, that this is traditional or contemporary, and even the language. These are critical tools. I'm sure that if we were to develop the language of articulation, of narrativization, of actually the episteme of art, the aesthetics would be different from the perspective of the creators over there. And that is one thing that I would allow others to contribute to. But one other issue that I just quickly would want to point out is who is writing your own history. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's very critical. Who is writing your own history? The African American art, for example, there was this I think the kind of exchange that occurred in the 90s. Art museums, art museums. I wasn't going to use the word. The question was asked whether they indeed were, racist. That's a critical issue, a very legitimate issue. But one critical factor from the African American artists and the community's perspective is that those who write about their work, those who critique artworks created by others, are those who indeed have developed the kind of the language of critical, narration that does not necessarily favor the other, the African American, the black and African American community, because it's also a power play. There is the issue of who accepts whom into museums, who curates whom into existence. It is a critical issue in the sense that if we do not have the medium, the mode of actually narrating ourselves into history, which is why this is very important. Narrating yourself into history. Forget about the fact that this is, a community of 12 artists to start with. I'm looking beyond now. 100 years from now, if we all will agree to come back, 100 years from now, to look at where we would be then. I hope we will be able to look back and say, look, it's Chicago. This is where this thing started. The way we now talk about the Impressionists. It wasn't such a big deal when a group of people, Monet and the rest, got together, let's exhibit. They didn't even give themselves the name the Impressionists. So who narrates whom to history depends on whose language we're using. And so to the extent that that is an indisputable fact, we also have to acknowledge the fact that we have as much right. I do, as anybody else, in my own category, in my own class, in my own group, as an artist, as a critic, as an art historian, I can stand with the best of my peers in the field and present cases. So we shouldn't by any means be intimidated by the language factor. And so that is how these things are. The traditional part also has to do with the idea that this is beautiful because Picasso and co. have said so. At the turn of last century, when finally Mademoiselle d'Avignon was, given birth to in 1907, and it became a major kind of thing. It was controversial because It was so bad, it was good. That was the idea. Remember Michael Jackson? You know, I'm bad. That was the idea. And the idea, therefore, that you have the quota people, figures, and that kind of stuff, that validated, quote-unquote, African art, which until that time was regarded as mere curios. Things that you just didn't recognize as art because they were produced by black people who at that time were not recognized, and we don't need to bring the issue of slavery here because it is central to what we're dealing with. The idea of recognizing who the other is. Forgetting also that without the other, self is not validated. So what is contemporary, what is traditional, it's an ongoing kind of debate, but the traditional, the way we now use it in scholarly circles, deals with the artworks produced by peoples of Africa, and I do have a definition to share with you, which I do not agree with, but which is current in the field, that it must be art produced by the peoples in Africa, used within the context and that kind of stuff, which I thought was hogwash. It flies in the face of reason. And all you need to do is to go to Cote d'Ivoire and find that the young men who produce artworks that we now see in catalogs are the same people who produce things for the market. And the difference is that one has been used in context, either as masks, worn, danced, and installed, and the other is brand new. And yet, when we get to museums here, what do? You go to museums here, you are made to behave quite differently. The museum imposes its own kind of will on you. You have to behave as an intellectual. You stick your neck out to pretend you understand those things. Even where you do not understand it, you put your hand behind your back. Shh. Nobody talks in the museum. That's the kind of culture that we have created. And I keep asking the question, are museums here, are museums in Africa the same as museums here? Do they serve same purposes? My argument is no. Because what we call museums in Africa are not museums, they are shrines.
Yes.
They are shrines where your forefathers and ancestors are supplicated. You know, you call on them, you pray to them. And so these are differences that we can look into. I just want to keep quiet for now and let others chime in. Thank you very much.
Well, you can jump
It's a
in.
pleasure, yes, for me
okay.
to be here with these two esteemed gentlemen. And after hearing my brother speak over there, I barely have words to say. But I teach African art at Chicago State. And one of the first things that we talk about is what is art. If you look at some of the languages, and my brothers here can confirm, if you look at some of the languages of Africa, only recently was the word art put in the vocabulary and created. Because what the Europeans call African art is something that the Africans use for everyday living. Every day. They pray to a shrine. They use a pot. They use the figure. And so, and most of it was used for religious purposes. Not all, but most. And so, you have to then repurpose the art to fit into European culture so that it can make sense to the Europeans. And then what it does is rob the art that was originally created by and for the Africans, for their culture. And so I think what my brother is saying, we have to again reclaim that which was originally intended to be used for the purpose that is now misused. And so that brings us to this wonderful African art, contemporary African art, kind of strange name. what is it used for? Because all African art is made for something. It's not like the Europeans who buy art for status, who come over and have a glass of champagne with me and toast to my beautiful piece of art. No, that's not why African art is made.
And just to add, to what you've said and that of Professor Eligede, when it comes to art definition, even though in the Western sense of it, they say art is a universal language that, therefore, the art historian or the people writing about art, they are Westerners, and they are looking at it from the point of view of, of the West. So therefore, they say art is a universal language. Even though that might be true, but the truism in that is limited, to a certain extent. Because if art is a universal language, how come not every individual understands, an art piece? For instance, an African art. They might say, okay, no, this is no art. And that, aggravates to the issue of dividing art into two aspects. As my senior colleagues, have been talking about, the contemporary or modern art and the traditional art. And they associate traditional art to the people outside of the Western world. They say they produce traditional art, and contemporary art is linked or associated with the Western world, which is not so. So, and that is the reason if we see or find people exhibiting, their contemporary work, say contemporary African art, as in these examples, say, contemporary art from Ghana, from Ivory Coast, from East Africa, from North Africa, and so on and so forth. So meaning that it will allow the people to define themselves, not giving the opportunity, to the outsiders to define their own personality, their own self, their own identity, for them. So, going back to the issue of the classification, contemporary and or modern art and traditional art, again, is a social construct. It's a cultural issue, cultural construct. For instance, prior to 1935, I would say, there's even nothing about traditional African art. Prior to 1935, for instance, at Museum de Homme in Paris, which they changed to Museum of Art or Museum of African Art, there are so many African art collections. They were categorized and classified under the umbrella of ethnographic, materials. So they were put or housed in the museums. They call it Museum de Homme. So it was as from 1935, then people started recognizing that there's something artistic about it. That is, if the people can recognize it, because art is a visual text. That's another definition. It's a visual text. And it's a medium of communication. So meaning that if you are able to communicate within your people, within your culture, and you are able, to forge ahead, to use art in the society, to define yourself, and to make it as a technology that is, use art to better your living, to showcase, your identity, then that is a form of art.
I'd like to jump in here for a minute because I'm thinking of how when I was growing up, we didn't know we were poor until someone told me we were poor.
Amen. That's true.
So once that definition, that label was imposed, then it changed my modality for living, how I perceive self, and how I engage community. So my question is, even in terms of the art being text and the labeling that you were talking about, Mr. Parker, about the art just being an extension of everyday life, it was visceral, it was organic, no definition. It just was until someone else came and labeled. Is there an inherent danger, or is there a negative impact that we might experience if we do start labeling it as art? I understand what you're saying, too. Do something to improve yourself with your art. But now it becomes a vehicle where it is monetized, and we knock it up to another level where it's no longer that organic expression, but it's done for the purpose of gain of some level. Be it monetary, be it for status, be it for definition of culture with that intention, not it just being organic. Is that problematic, or is that something we should just simply embrace?
I think, I think there is no reason we may not embrace it. So what I'm saying is that if we like, we may embrace it. In the sense that, like I said before, that art is a medium of communication. And just like you said, that, that is there a problem, to say, okay, this is art? And to some extent, what is known today as contemporary art, be it contemporary American art, contemporary, Spanish art, or contemporary African art, artists, and particularly museums, they have commodified art. So, and today, it's not just about communication alone. It's about selling your work. It's about making money. Museums, galleries, making a lot of money. Collectors making a lot of money. Even though there is danger in that, but also, there are some, advantages. For instance, so many museums today, you don't pay when you go there. You still have the opportunity, to look at the art, to appraise it, to enjoy it and to read it, the way you like. So that's the reason I will say that even though people have now compartmentalized art, but I don't find any problem, with that. The only problem I have, has to do with people underrating, art they don't know about. For instance, traditional, art, traditional African art, and even some contemporary African art. Because most of the contemporary African art that we are seeing now, they are a fusion of so many factors. Their experience, their cultural landscape, past experiences, and everything they see around them. So meaning that if we undervalue contemporary, traditional African art, in favor of, contemporary art, so to say, the so-called contemporary art today, they have their roots in the traditional art, just as, we rightly mentioned. Look at, the Musée d'Avignon, Legends of Avignon, painted by Pablo Picasso, in 1907. Prior to that time, he knew nothing about that. And Cubism had not developed, prior to that time. It was when he went to Museum de Home, because he collected a lot of non-Western art. He even bought an art piece that was stolen, he got into trouble about it. They thought that, he stole the artwork, but later they realized that it was, he stolen, art. What I'm saying in essence is that all those that he acquired do influence him, to invent what, is known today as, Cubism or synthetic Cubism. Therefore, raising the status of traditional African art to the status of contemporary art in the West, which today, sell like, like gold.
So my next question then is, how do we interject and how do we determine the value, high art value, of new art forms or expressions? And I'm looking at the piece with the very delicate, with the leaves, mixed with the paint. Who would make that distinction, and how do we move it from being an expression of how I feel, something I found very beautiful, to something that is marketable, carries high value in the art world, that should be showcased in a museum or other institution where high art is revered? And maybe a better question is, how do we make the distinction between high art and any other kind of art?
Well, we have to make the distinction. Now that we have taken traditional African art, and we know what we mean by traditional African art, that's the art, the first art that was made by our ancestors, to the contemporary art of today. And since we now are making this art, we are making it on par with European artists, and therefore it has to be looked upon as art that is, in fact, on par. And so when we go into the museums, when we go into the galleries, we do not go with our heads like this, but like this. We're giving you a gift, of our culture, the first culture, where all of your art comes from. And therefore, it has to be valued as you value all the art here.
I think the operational word here is value, which is very loaded. Who determines value? Who ascribes value? Vincent van Gogh, many of you are familiar with him, painted over about 800 paintings. When he was alive, sold only one. In 1987, a painting of his, Irises, was auctioned for $87 million.
Wow.
I felt if I were Van Gogh, I would come from Italy, snatch that money and go back. Who ascribes values to artworks? Right. And the issue also is that art has become investment instrument. That the chances of that tanking are very rare, very slim. People have made their living by investing in artists as they were developing and have promoted him. And of course you have a tribe of art critics and people who write them up and that kind of stuff. And as the value of the artist, rises, your investment in him or her also rises. Now, it's a different thing about whether the artwork is really excellent or not. If you were to have an original Picasso, it doesn't matter what's on that paper. If it is Picasso, that's money in the bank for you. Exactly. So who ascribes values to that? And that brings us back, it's a circular kind of thing, to the idea of culture. When at the turn of the century, people like Leo Frobenius traveled to Nigeria, to Africa, they did the best they could to undervalue the artworks that they found there, the Ife, the very beautiful Ife pieces. It was so compellingly beautiful that Frobenius had to find another source of origin for that. He said this could not have been made by the people, by Africans. Right. It was from the lost city of Atlantis. Come on. Black people can't make those things. Of course we know better now. That is part of the values. And it is not a new thing. What Frobenius did in 1910 actually was not any new. you need to go to classical antiquity and find, writers, Herodotus, Ptolemy, and all of them writing about Africa in ways that were so disparaging. The history was virtually constructed for people in the Middle Ages to consume because Africans were from the dark continent. And therefore, the value of the artwork, whatever comes from that continent, was not to be taken seriously because we define what art has to be. And getting to Africa, not seeing any bronze sculptures on, statues on pedestals in the middle of the city, these would have produced that was, come on. These are curios that they produce. And that is the thing about value. And it's changed. It's changed because people have written, from here about it. But one question I want us to also think about, ask yourself next time you get to a museum, either of natural history or of art, you get to the African art section. How were these things acquired? How much did the museums pay? That's very critical. It's a discussion we have not really entered into because it is the pillaging, the stealing of Africa that continues even till now. You get to a museum, you see an Oba's crown that you never even saw when you were in that town growing up. You ask, how did this get here? Who paid for it? These are questions that we have not answered, and still in terms of values. And of course, the classification also is part of the value system. It started as primitive. I thought we've outgrown that. Okay, sorry about that. We're using tribal. We're using tribal. And then some of us complained, come on, tribal? You call people in Africa who really are, who have their own nations. The Yoruba are about 30 million people. Yes. And you call them a tribe? you have countries in Europe that are this, size in terms of size of the Yoruba. And okay, we don't say tribe anymore. We use traditional. How about that? So we're still wrestling with classification. And even as we were doing that, in the contemporary, we use contemporary as something that's happening now, period. Contemporary art is the art produced now. Historians down the road, 50 years from now, would reclassify. There's no doubt about that. We know modern art, for example, has that periodization. Modern art is fixed. And then there was something called postmodern. We toyed with that idea, not long ago. Somebody even told me in New York in the 1990s, there is postmodern sandwich. Postmodern sandwich? What does that look like? Who eats that? And so these are things that we use. And I started earlier by saying that we love to compartmentalize. We love to put things in little, cubicles and call them. And don't forget that we can change our mind down the road. That's why you have your mind, because you want to change it. It's always with you. So that is the thing about values. But very, very important is the idea of art as commodity, as investment. Andre Serrano, many of you are probably familiar with him, the controversy that he generated. Andre Serrano, a photographer who did a piece of Christ, a sculpture of Christ that he immersed in a bowl of urine and milk and called Peace Christ. And that pissed them off in Washington. So much so that National Endowment for the Arts got in. Oh no, you're not going to spend my dollars there, for such nonsense. So what is art to one person really is poison to another. And it's always been bad. And of course, you may have also realized that any crisis, even at the local level, that affects your school board, for example, if there is budget issue, it is going to start with the arts. They're going to cut the arts. Yes. They got, the art classes and music and all of that. That's where they start with. And it is not entirely different in Africa, when you get to that point. So these are issues that come to culture. And we should not forget also that even while we say traditional is the art produced by the people of Africa, that culture is changing even as we speak. Apprentices are no longer being taken, by the way, in Africa. I mean, it used to be that you as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, boy would go and live with the master carver and spend as many as 10, 15 years with them until you graduate and become a Lamidi Fakeye. You could close your eyes, it was said of Olowe, and sculpt. You could actually put something under your big riga, Babariga and carve something. They're no longer made that way because education, which is westernization, has taken over. And so things are changing.
So does that compromise the integrity of our art? That's why I'm going back to that question.
Allow them to.
And while we pause here for a moment, how about if we interject a woman's voice in the conversation? Lisa Gaines from Diaspora Rhythms is here. Okay, please join us.
McDonald.
Okay. So understanding the progression and the change, and I open up for questions as well, so get your questions in.
Well, one thing I would like to say, and it's something from Diaspora Rhythms we discuss often. Here, if we had a reporter from the Post, Tribune, New York Times, and they wrote articles on this art and took pictures on this art, people from all over Chicago would flock to this place. So it's a very cultural, political thing that we're dealing with. And we must understand that. So therefore, how does this art get into that venue? That's the question.
And my question to you is, as just an avid collector, does it start with people collecting works, commissioning works, so that we develop a reputation of artist, a pedigree, if you will, that we can establish for our own artists?
Exactly. And not only then, after you buy the art, you must gift the museum with the art, to put the artist's name out there.
Right,
And when there's an art auction, we don't buy this work at the cheapest price, but at the highest price. And so we are some of the culprits of our own culture. Maybe we don't have the money, but at an auction, there are some pieces that don't even sell because we think it's too much, or it sells at a minimum bid, opening bid. And we should be bidding on that piece so that the price will go up. And then present that piece to some gallery, some museum, and said, this piece on this date sold for this amount of money, and these are the kind of people all over Chicago, even though it may just be in our community, are buying this artist. And that's how the price is raised.
There are two other things to add on to that. The importance of documentation. And if you look at this, and I'll just pick this up, this is a wonderful piece of documentation. Last night I was here, I was with Kathleen Bethel, who got a piece, and Dio gifted it, and she's at Northwestern. So now it'll be in the Africana collection. So you've got that history that stays. The other importance, I think, in terms of documentation is sometimes we underestimate the value of a good dealer, because if that dealer is good, and if you look at those who have risen, and my background is also marketing, you've got a lot of artists, but it's the marketing of the artist. It may not have anything to do with the work, but it's that dealer who gets that artist into shows, gets that artist into museums, and guides that artist, but also sort of nurtures that artist in terms of building up the value as well as documenting the rise of that value. And that we sometimes undercut, because a lot of times we like to go and get the, well, a lot of us, in Diaspora Rhythms. And Diaspora Rhythms is an organization of collectors of the African diaspora. And in terms of, and so we like to undercut by going directly to the artist and just getting it as cheap as we can, which is also, but not documenting with a bill of sale or the bio. And so that's one of the initiatives that Diaspora Rhythms is doing with the artists that we have honored in the past in terms of just starting with that and documenting those in our collection. Diaspora Rhythms has about 40 members, and we honor like 4 or 5 artists. We've honored Dio twice, and he's been honored this year. But just starting there and then breaking out. The other thing, which is an example in terms of, and you had said something in terms of, a lot of you had the pleasure of being at the Southside Community Arts Center here, Couture. And there you saw in terms of the influence of both African art as well as contemporary art, and just how, and the beauty of that also is that in his later years, he's 98, is he? That he has gifted to major museums his artwork so that there's a living history. Right. But we don't judge in Diaspora Rhythms what art is or what kind of art you have. All we ask is that you buy art from artists of the African diaspora. They can be in Brazil, they can be in the U.S., that it's original art. We never make any type of judgment of whatever art you have. And a lot of times you see us with, when we go to our homes, it's an eclectic version. We just had a meeting at one of our members, and she had a beautiful collection of traditional African art that you've defined, as well as contemporary, you know, African-American art and African art. So I think it's just, you know, I don't think we make that many judgments in terms of what you have. But it's just that you start somewhere, and as you go, I think your taste evolves, and you become more accepted, and you become a little bit more critical.
And also, I think, you know, the value of art, you know, if we look at it very carefully, is being dictated, you know, by the class, you know, the class of the people. Because, particularly, you know, the patrons. Anything the patrons want, even if it is good or if it is bad, they are still going to ascribe, you know, a lot of value to it. So, and again, concerning, you know, class, when I say class, you know, it doesn't stop, you know, about being wealthy or, you know, but it, you know, it is inside class that we even have, you know, gender, you know, and all the rest, you know, of age. So people in the first class, so to say, the high class, they determine, you know, the value. For instance, even look at the Western, you know, look at it from the Western point of view, Western perspective in the, you know, 1800s, 18th century, 17th century. If we look at, you know, the work of, you know, female artists, for instance, were not valued as anything. You know, look at the work of, the Italian, artist Artemisia Gentileschi. Very good, brilliant painter, you know, Baroque painter. Anytime she signed her name, her art will not be recognized, will not be valued. But anytime her father, you know, took the art from her and, you know, claimed it to be made by, you know, by the father, then they say, oh, this is the best. You know, this is good, this is great art. So, like I'm saying, you know, it has to do with issue of class. You know, which under class we have, you know, so many, perspective associating, again, with class. And secondly, most of the patrons, they are Westerners. So, and they dictate, you know, if they say this is good, it's good. If they say they don't like it, they don't like it. And that's the reason art, particularly African art, the so-called traditional African art, is being known today at the detriment of contemporary art. For instance, I have, students and, colleagues. So that told me that, their patrons once said that, why are you painting like Picasso? Why are you painting like Jackson Pollock? That we know only traditional art. And there's no Jackson Pollock, style that you want to use, that we will not be able to collect it. We want that traditional African art. So they are fixing it that, okay, this is what you must produce. So therefore they are restricting, your creativity.
Right.
Your ability to think.
I have a follow-up question on the reverse side of that in 1 second, but I do want to open up to the floor. I believe you have a question.
Some of that differs from the Renaissance period, where the patrons didn't want black artists to paint something contemporary of that era. They didn't want to see us paint Paris and the Eiffel Tower, etc. They wanted us to remain in that box. So the tradition continues. Is that what you're saying? That they still want to box us in terms of what we should experience, what our artists should experience?
I think that there is a change. There has been a change in that. When we historicize, we need to be aware of what has remained, what has changed. As an example, it was possible in the Renaissance time for you as a patron to actually dictate to the artist the subject matter. And also, I want you to include me in that painting, and my wife. I'll be kneeling here praying.
Are you talking about the Harlem Renaissance or the other Renaissance?
No, I'll get to the other Renaissance. Okay. No, Harlem, I'm talking about, did I say Harlem?
No. I think were you talking about Harlem Renaissance?
No, Harlem.
No, the 15th, 16th century Renaissance.
Clarification. He was talking about Harlem.
That they actually would indicate the subject and also determine the colors that you would have to use. I'm talking about the Italian Renaissance. Now, to come to the Harlem Renaissance, you would find that Alain Locke was the one who, in fact, categorized the ideas that have remained very strong since then. He said that you, as African American artists, have no reason to be ashamed to claim Africa as your heritage. After all, the likes of Picasso used those things. Why are you so ashamed of that? And you'd also find that coupled with the very, very difficult times under which people lived at that time, that it was in fact a lot easier for people to go to Paris to study. A good example is Tana. Osama Tana, went to Paris and never came back. And you had a lot of people like Woodruff, for example, and many of them who went and studied in Paris and Europe and thrived because of that. And so I bring the issue back to that of patronage, that we be careful not to see patronage as just one track kind of stuff. What you just described is in fact a form of patronage by facilitating the contemplation of art. Just merely facilitating and conscientizing people. Here are people that we want you to be. Why don't you look at the work and let them make make up their mind about what they want to collect. Many collectors start without even knowing what to collect, and the colors will speak to you. It's not any different from going to the store, JCPenney, use Walmart here, and picking a color. You like this, and you cannot rationalize it. I don't know why. It's not any different from if blue is your favorite color or red is your favorite color. You don't have to explain it. It's your right to choose. But when you start collecting, it grows on you. And so, patronage, you have the particular the area that caters to facilitating the growth or even bringing people together and letting them be. And then, of course, like the example that you brought up was quite important. Narrating yourself into history. I would have been very, very sore, very disappointed if this show had happened without a catalog. Because the art historian in me would, it doesn't matter what the size of that catalog. You need to write it because you are historicizing it. Somebody comes in 10, 15, 20 years and looks through the archives and begins to, wow, this is how these guys started. He's now a big person. And that's where the whole thing starts. But you also have people who buy simply because the artist is growing or the artist is known. So the Harlem Renaissance, to come back to your issue, a seminal kind of period in the growth of African American art, particularly. And you have somebody like Jeff Donaldson, Afro-Cobra, again finding a different kind of flank, interested in, for example, promoting transnationalism. He was interested in reaching out to Africa. The way now that this is the homecoming of sorts, really, that we have a critical mass. The reason I would want to answer the question, where is Tunde, where is that? The reason that it took 7 years for this to get off the ground is that you needed a critical mass. You needed that body of artists to respond to what you are doing for it to take off. This is not by any means recommending that those of you who are interested in starting something new have to wait for 7 years. It simply means that you keep trying until you get it right. And I hope that, with the support of the locality here, that this becomes annualized. At least a biennial of sorts, at the very least. So that once every 2 years, triennial, if you cannot do it once every 2 years, triennial, because of the difficulty of getting this going, at least you make it a recurrent kind of thing, such that people will begin to expect. And then hopefully we'll be able to expand, reach out to other artists, because there are many artists who are yet to be here, who are yet to even come to this country, and hopefully we'll go on from there.
And I think just to add to that, art historians, art critics, of African ancestry, they cannot be absolved, from, the blame, just like, he rightly said concerning, the catalog. We have not been writing our own history, our own art history. And when we leave it for others to write, what do we expect? They can overemphasize what, is not really so. And they can even underestimate. In other words, they can misrepresent. So I think it's high time. We have so many art historians, art critics, but many, they don't go outside the academic of just maybe teaching and maybe re-examining, the past, the famous artists like Picasso, like, the Renaissance, like all those 17th century art, 18th, 19th, 21st century, and they concentrate their work on, Western art. So, and when I say Western art, not just Western art, the Euro-American, blood Western art. That is art that has to do with white. I'm not saying it should not be studied. It should be studied. But art from non-Western societies also should be studied and be documented. So therefore, if people are able to read what they see, then the orientation will change, the value, will change. So we should not leave it just, to, others to write it for us.
This has always been a conundrum. Randolph, is that you with a question? Okay, please ask your question.
Good afternoon, distinguished panel. I'd like to thank the ancestors, first of all, for bringing me here for me to enjoy this brilliance. My commentary goes back to what Ms. Grable first opened up with about the language system. And it has to do with what I call linguistic castration. You know, people have often asked me from time to time, do you speak a foreign language? Yes, I speak English. It's not your also. And as well as many white people. If you're Italian and German, it's not your mother tongue. So therefore, I would like to say, I'd like to see more of your interpretation of words, key words that would frame a lot of things that we deal with here. Intelligence. What is the Yoruba concept of intelligence? What is a Yoruba genius? What is a Hausa master? You know, these words we need to have in here someplace. I'd also like to see map. You know, a map defines your place in the world. It's your address, your origin. My ancestors came from Mende people. We were craftsmen. I know this. It runs in the family. My great-great-grandfather was a blacksmith on a plantation. And we kept that knowledge. We have long memories in the family. It's further research too. Anyway, we need to understand our words for our own things, our ideas and our philosophies. You know, that was cut off so severely. The older I get, the more I realize how awful that was to take our language away, take away a person's language. Prayers and incantations can't be uttered in the proper sequence and so forth. So, again, your interpretation, bringing this to us would be a great help. I'd like to see a map in your next one. Another one is coming. I know.
I'm just, okay.
Yeah, may I also suggest that language is critical. For example, when we say traditional, it's as if you have something that is traditional forever, that doesn't change. So the language leads us to assume that traditional is past. That is just using an English definition of time, a Western definition of time. Since the traditional too is always evolving, so it's nothing ever, it's just the way it is. So perhaps, again, we have to re-traditionalize the modern, instead of assuming that there is a modern that is very different from the traditional. So when people talk about modernization, why not claim tradition and make it really something that is evolving and is changing, so you don't have to have the separation of traditional and modern. Those little compartments that you talk about.
Those two words have been used in every century.
Yeah.
18th century, they said modern, traditional. So how do you...
I think the traditional is the word was intended to be dismissive of the things that were African, and the assumption that those things are fixed and like that forever, which is just not, it's not real. I mean, everybody knows that. Nobody needs to be told that that is not real. That people use different medium, things come, they change their style. Our stories also are changing, the historians are reinterpreting. And
I agree with you. It's a conundrum that we're yet to resolve in the field. The idea of traditional, which is, okay, your two hands are up, I don't know what else to use. But I want to distinguish what is produced from what we don't have here. And yet, traditional presupposes some degree of ossification. It's no longer, and you cannot come up on what is traditional without the assumption this has been done again and again and again and again. And like I said earlier, it is no longer so. So yes, that's a major point there. And coming to the issue of languages, by the way, Roland Abiodun is a very, very good mind in terms of Yoruba language. Robert Faris Thompson, who many of you may be aware of, has done wonderfully in globalizing concepts, more of concepts than indeed languages. His Yoruba is very suspect. I wouldn't say this to his face. But I give him credit for actually trying. One of my pet peeves, still in terms of languages, one of my pet peeves is what goes on in my field, in art history, in the literature. Somebody writes and puts one wolof one Yoruba word did not, and yet the whole text is in English. And you don't even speak that language. When we were here as graduate students, we had to study two foreign, and I like your concept of English as a foreign language. I agree with you. We had to speak, we had to write and pass those exams. And yet colleagues of mine would go to Africa for a week and come back and write and lace their text with some words that have no meaning. And some Yoruba words, even the critics on the Yoruba are wrong. And I feel, why do your audience does not even care? It's not that they know what Ewa means, from Ada. And so those are the things that we have to look at. I agree with you. Roland Abiodun, like I said, yes.
Yes, one more thing. People don't realize the Western art world was full of artistic double talk. And it takes a group of a bunch of young black school kids to come into a gallery and say, this is whack. And it is. Their minds have not been conditioned with this stuff that we've been given here. We have to realize that we have to move this cloud, the emperor's new clothes, away from our minds and see what is really there, because it's true. They tell you, I worked in all the major museums in the city, and I have installed some stuff that was insane and made to think, and these art critics come around and say, they stand with there, and they say this and they say that. This is crazy. And a lot of the so-called European masters were crazy, and their followers lauded them not realizing that. Van Gogh was crazy. Impressionism. It looks like somebody had dirt on their glasses when they were painting.
To that,
We have a question here.
Yeah.
And then Donna?
Yes. I just want to first say that it's an honor to be around all of these amazing perspectives and artists. And coming from a younger generation and someone that recently am starting to learn more about art, African art and other art forms outside of it, and respecting it more, my curiosity is, how are the current contemporary African artists in this art world, how are you looking to utilize the current technology and the younger generation perspective of art with your philosophy and beliefs? Because I feel like the younger people, we're going to carry on this, and the internet is changing everything so dynamically. So how are you guys utilizing some of those current tools and some of the younger generation trends to kind of integrate, to help expose us to the art, garner more support? Because the younger generation, they do offer a lot of support. So I want to know, what are your thoughts on just technology, the internet, and the younger generation right now?
Black Art in America has a huge listserv, and you can opt in, and it's a voice for artists, it's a voice for collectors.
Mm-hmm.
You can see artists' work. You can of all lycra,
Right.
and it's a chance to hook up, and you can put your own opinion. That's one way that's open to everybody.
Nice.
That you can do it, I think.
Nice.
And then the one thing I want to say that's not an answer to your question is, with diaspora business, one of the biggest problems that we've had are people owning up to that they are collectors because of what you said, the class thing. And so what I would suggest is that you own your power.
That's right.
With Black Art in America, because if I look at you, you are wearing art. Mm-hmm. If I look, half of you all either be your earrings. Fayla just walked out; she just does wonderful stuff. But be it in your clothes, and I think just owning your power and writing what you think and responding to some of the craziness on the blogs, because there are a lot of blog sites. Black Art in America is the one that comes to mind, where you see some of everything up there that you can join.
Right.
And just, it's a great way. But also, I think going to lectures like this, the Art Institute, the Cultural Center, Chicago probably does more than the Art Institute. And I'll give you an example. Motley exhibit is going to the Chicago Cultural Center because the Art Institute wouldn't take it, even though they have some of his works. So I think, but the beauty of it being at the Chicago Cultural Center is that it's free.
Yes.
Whereas if you'd gone to the Art Institute, it would have only been free on Thursday nights. But just looking, because it's everywhere, you can learn. And I think just talking and interacting And when you go to, like last night was wonderful because the artists were here, and you can learn a lot about their perspectives, and then just bring your friends in, and that's sort of how you get hooked, is just showing up.
Thank you.
University of Chicago, too, and the Block Museum up at Northwestern, they do a lot, and just get on their listservs because they had it, and they do a whole lot of workshops that are free that give you, that they have, the incubator has a lot of younger artists, black artists, but you'll get their perspectives too, so you just got to be out there, you got to talk, and go talk to the artists and just get into their heads.
Thank you.
The other thing in relationship to technology is there are some artists who are constantly putting out information on themselves on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I can think of 2 or 3 right off the top of my head. I'm not going to necessarily mention them. But if you were on Facebook with some of them, you would go in, and in one day you would probably see at least 5 or 6 new photos or 5 or 6 new comments about their work, where they're promoting their work. And in promoting their work to the general public, talking about valuation, that helps with valuing their work and possibly increasing the value of their work.
Right.
And that's through technology.
I think promotion has been really good, and like you said, all of the events and those things. But I'm particularly interested in how contemporary African artists are looking to integrate the use of technology in marketing, like just in general, not so much on promotion on social media, but really, I guess I should say, with the business of their art.
This is one example of this is an answer to your question.
Thank
this
you.
Particular show. Earlier on, we were saying that the curators, Tunde and Dayo, they've been friends forever, but they've not physically met in the last 30 years. In the last 30 years, the power of technology that they were able to coordinate all of these things, get the catalog going, and harass people like me, and get people to really, support their cause. That's the power of technology. But additionally, some of us who teach, I teach at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio.
Okay.
And they call us an elite university, the most expensive in Ohio. Not something you want to say during the session. What I do encourage students to do, one of the courses that I teach, is that they have to curate a show. They have to have a blog. And they have to reach out and contact by email, Facebook, or use the archives of African American art. It has to be part of what they do to reach out and talk to artists in Africa, artists in Europe, Sukari Gascam, Magdalena Dundo, and all of them. And so those are things that I don't write about, but I surely hope that those who have actually gone through that will become inspired, apart from the knowledge that they have gained, to see the power of technology. There's no way you can be a successful artist today without integrating technology into your work. And at any rate, this is an age of Google. You can Google anything, including Google itself. And that's if the artist himself herself did not put anything online, chances are that you can still find him or her there. So
I have a question to that too, and I'm going to go to Javi. And just in terms of I'll say cultural czars, the cultural gatekeepers, those who are esteemed as being the ones who can make the definition of what is good, valuable art, an articulation of our Black aesthetic experience that we really value as a people, versus someone who is highly successful in getting 1 million hits on Google or Facebook or wherever they might be to say that I'm the most popular. Is there a distinction between what the cultural czars would say and what the popular movement might say? Or is one just as valid as the other?
If it brings money. That's the bottom line. I mean, if you're able to get into shows, if you get people to contact you and say, look, I've seen your website and, would you be open to business? That is the equivalent of having an agent, actually, without paying for any. If you're a basketball player, you know what I'm talking about, to do the negotiating for you. So it is one thing to have a critical mass following you on Twitter and that kind of stuff, but if you are spending so much time on, hey, Paul George broke his leg yesterday, as opposed to making money off your art, you may want to reconsider what exactly is the topic you are promoting on Twitter. And if you are into trainers or binaries and you are getting to shows, that simply tells you something about the power of technology, that you are harvesting, you are making investments, and it's giving you some yields. So if you are interested in followership, I have 2,000 plus on Facebook and that kind of stuff, versus, okay, I'm in this group, and we have regular meetings, and we're going to be having a show. You would have to be the one to make that call. And if you are a professional artist, I think it becomes more of an imperative for you to actually get yourself into circles that promote your work. Those of us who are professors, the incentive is quite different. I'm more interested, for example, in doing my own work without the pressure of, do I sell? No, I'm not selling, because I can afford to produce. I at least hold on to what I have right now because I pay my bills regularly. Can I make more money really aggressively promoting my work? I will tell you, let me retire and then I face that part.
Javi?
Yeah.
You have a question?
I have a question. Yeah, my name is Jara Jabi. I'm from Mali.
Someone's speaking here.
My name is Jara Jabi. I'm from Mali, West Africa. The question I'm asking, because we all understand about how the European artists started, how African artists started. Well, the European artists started about all the names we call Picasso, all that. They even mention themselves. They get the idea from like Senefo, and Dogon, and Fang Gabon. He himself collected those things. But every time when we talk about the image, about the Picasso, we just say we do the Picasso job. So since we all know that they change all these things for us, the time we lost the power, because it's a power, it's like you have today, tomorrow you're going to lose, and maybe after tomorrow you're going to get it back. Because Africa was running Europe, Africa conquered Spain, Africa conquered France. Africa, if you want to know that, you're going to the Moors, and you find out the truth. About 1,000 years ago, Africa was running the Europe, and during that time. And we lost the power, they ran it back into Africa, and to take it back. After they took it back, they changed all the name, all the thing, they changed. So since slavery is over, the colonial is over, so Escala, I'm asking you, Escala right now, when are we going to get it back, what we lost? So we keep repeating, they say this is not true, or they say that is not true. When are we going to start changing it and writing now, and 100 years later, and our children can come in and say, yes, we started beginning, and this is starting this is starting that.
I'm sorry to jump in here. I think slavery is not over. Colonization is not over.
Okay.
It's not over. It's a matter of the mind.
Okay.
Our minds in Africa are colonized. Even after they left, even after Europe left, we continue now to run after them. We want them to come back. Look, Nigeria is a good example of the perpetuation of slavery, of colonial mentality. It is not over. There is a veneer. There is that. Mali is a good example. You look at the Dogon, you look at the work that they produce. You look here, they stand before them proud blacksmiths and that kind of stuff. And they developed their own systems. So let me, my brother, assure you that we are living on borrowed times until, and we have to stop, we have to really look within ourselves in Africa. African leaders have to do their own bit. They have to really lead from within and make themselves quite viable before we can say, okay, they need help. And I mean more than changing the names of our countries. You saw that with Mobutu Sese Seko. Not only did he change the name of the country, he changed his uniform. He started wearing leopard hat. It didn't change anything. And Congo became, one of the worst countries in Africa. Mali is another example. Right now, in your country, you know what is happening. Half of Mali is gone. And you can also say that of Nigeria with Boko Haram. So there is so much that is going on. In the 60s, that was when Africa became, independent, quote unquote. And I can tell you that today, Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. The wealthiest, you might say, that's debatable. Certainly one with the best GDP is a bundle of contradictions, where you have very wealthy people, and next to them, people living in abject poverty. Power supply, in talking about power supply as an example, over the radio 2 days ago, one thing struck me. They were talking about the current quarrel going on between Israel and Palestine, and the thing I'm drawing attention to here is that they said that the power station was knocked out, leaving Palestine, the Hamas area, with 4 hours of power per day. It struck me as, boy, this is a situation of war. They still have 4 hours of power per day in Nigeria. They do not have 4 hours of power in 4 months. Yes. Some parts of Nigeria, yes. I was with King Ibe, who was the secretary to the government before he got laid off. In his house, palatial area, they were using huge generators. As we were having dinner with him, generator even packed up. So we now, to come back to your question about when do we come back, if you look at the history of the world, you find that we are mortals. We are, our lifespan is so bigger. I have infinite hope, but it is probably not going to be in our lifetime. It is going to be, you're talking about centuries. I'm sure things are going to change. You are right in terms of the history, that in fact before the gun was introduced to Africa, Africa was on top of things. George Brooks wrote about the gun gap. It was what changed the whole picture. So we can discuss that. I feel so animated about the political implications of what we are dealing with that I try to restrain myself from going political. But it is very important. We need to be like that lady called Charity. We need to put our hearts together at home.
Okay, I think we have time for Dio. How much more time do we have?
It's okay, fine. Okay,
Okay,
let's
good.
keep going on to.
So I know we have Deborah is over.
Yeah.
I can't see you over there. There you go, Deborah Harrington. Okay.
Hi, I'm sorry I'm late, and sounds like you've been having a really fascinating conversation. My question really goes back to 2 questions ago, and the person asked about, which I thought was really a very complex question, was, how do you look at art in terms of success, based on so much commercial art versus other kinds of art, and how do you, begin to balance those things? And your response to that was, who's the ability of an artist to really be financially successful, to be able to get into, the domain of the arts and be able to navigate that using multimedia and other things. so my question is, how do you feel, I know a lot of artists, and so many of the artists I know aren't necessarily successful based on that definition, because they're trying to stay true to their values in terms of their art and not compromise those values, which does not put them in that glorious spot of celebrity and financial success. And so I guess the question is, when you look at those dynamics in the art world, where you do have some people who aren't necessarily great artists in terms of their technique, but can be extremely successful because of some cachet or relationships. And then you have this starving artist who is brilliant, you know, and people will tend to gravitate to the light, you know, where all of the activity is going, and that artist gets really wealthy. And then the starving artist, you know, you can buy their art and really love it because it's just so beautiful, but yet they don't have a place in the center of the artistic community. So how do you feel just in terms of reconciling those two worlds of artists? Because, you know, I tend to give greater importance to the starving artist in that case, and not the successful one. So I think that, you know, for me, the measure of success is not necessarily the ability to make money. So I just want your response to that.
Yeah, I think from the patronage point of view, there is little, you know, we can do. You know, if we are not, you know, maybe patrons, you know, there's little we can do. But in terms of advertisement, I think we can do more. Particularly art historians, art critics, you know, just like I said, some minutes ago, that it's high time we look into the work of, you know, those artists that they are very good, but because nobody will patronize their work, then they are just, you know, being left out. And, you know, the work of, you know, people like, you know, again, you know, like Marcel Duchamp, you know, not making any art, if you look at it from the point of view of the making or the skill, still, you know, their art are being sold, you know, with high price. So if people, particularly art critics, art writers, art historians, if they can look and maybe write something, you know, about, because so many patrons, they rely on what people have written about, you know, a particular artist. So if we can work on that, write about local artists, write, because I don't see any reason, for instance, Dio had been working, you know, doing a lot of work, rigorous work, and you know, look at his work and so many others here. But you don't find them a lot, you know, in maybe those academic, you know, writings, you know, you don't find them there. Patrons, they rely, you know, more on that. They want to say, oh, have this guy been written about, you know, what? So if we can do, that's the reason I say that there's nothing we can do about, you know, patronage. The only area in which we can contribute is, right, you know, about them. Let's bring them into limelight so that the patrons may see them, and, you know, from that, it might encourage them, you know, to buy their work.
And it doesn't always have to be a critic. You can write.
Exactly, anybody can write.
Now
exactly.
that we have social media, yes, you can write. If you see an artist, and you know, you may decide, I want to make artist John Doe famous. So I'm going to write about him. He's going to be on my Facebook, on my Twitter, and on this. I'm going to show his pictures every week. That's how you do it.
But you have to look at, I think, why the artist is creating. And that's an inside job as well as why you collect for a lot of people who aren't looking into the monetary system. As to why you're collecting that person, it's a personal connection. So if you've got, I think there are like 20,000 people in Chicago that claim they're visual artists.
Yeah.
There's no way that they're all going to get recognized. So I guess to me, and I think what Dan says and what Diaspora Rhythms does in honoring those artists who are in our collections, in terms of they have to be in our collections to vote on them, but I think the artist has to look at why they're producing the art as well as the collector, and there's some things that they're just not going to get rewarded for those efforts, given the number.
I'm going to make the comment that art is a big tent. It's not just a big tent, it's a very big tent, and it goes from the making to even doing things that are ephemeral. I saw a French artist who had an installation in which he created a cloud in a room. So art is a huge tent, and also I need to also mention that there's no such thing as a starving artist. You cannot make art if you're starving, and I know this because I've been there. I don't know whether, I think it was a marketing thing, but it's simply not possible to make art if you're starving. So art is a very big tent, and people make art for different reasons. I could go into, and people buy and collect art also for very different reasons.
It's inside job in the end.
For some people, it's to make money. Jeff Koons.
Yeah.
Okay, we could say that he's not talented as an artist. I'm not sure he finished. I don't think he had an art degree or even finished college. He's a fabricator. And that's, like I said, art is a very, very big tent. And I think a lot of us can borrow from a lot of those ideas. I'm doing that currently. I actually subcontract some of the things that I use in my art to other people and get into the direction as opposed to slaving away with paint all the time.
Well, you have to decide which way you want to go.
Which way you want to go.
Do you want to play to your audience and make the money, or do you want to be true to your art? And you have to make that decision.
We also need to contextualize this. I think often, if you look at the vocabulary so far, the list of artists that we have cited as, the primal ones, including the dead white artists, it's a very small percentage of those who ever, even during the times of Picasso, who ever practiced art. Every society determines whom it's going to glorify. To every Picasso, there'll be thousands of unsuccessful Picassos. Yes. And to think that everybody who claims to be an artist is ever going to be successful is to assume that because you earned a degree in art, MFA, which is the ultimate, that you would be a successful artist. It never, turns out that way.
Right.
There were several artists who graduated with MFA, and at least pump gas to survive, drive, semis to survive. And so we have to contextualize this. Not think that because you are an artist, therefore you are going to be successful. The statistics about how many artists in Chicago, 20,000 plus, and yet visual artists, visual artists. That's the way it works. And that is the pleasure that collectors have, to be able to be very selective and then go after those whom they like. And I like the idea that we should not all leave the work to critics and writers. There is a distinction I may, emphasize between writing for academic journals and writing for newspapers and I would suspect that to really get the people in the locality going, that the popular media are a very good source of promoting artists because you can do that again and again and again, and then it would allow people who are interested in artists to actually know where they live, go and meet with them and that kind of stuff. So those are the things that we need to be. And then for artists themselves, including me, I think it is very essential for us to also learn to go to visit other artists, see what others are producing, be current, see what is going. I love to look at the works of others not necessarily at this time that I'm going to be borrowing, but hey, the subconscious has a way of replenishing its own stock. So it is very important for us to attend shows, to participate in exhibitions, even those that we're not submitting any works to, and then to make, reach out and create some kind of connections. It's very important. So.
You speak of conundrums, and this is something I've wrestled with for forever and ever and ever. The definition of black art, and I want to contextualize that with the appreciation of how much of our art, I see Javi is gone, has been appropriated. And he offers this whole movement of let's reclaim what has been ours. Maybe if we did that, we could turn our world upside down. It's all black. But what is black art, African art, art that is created uniquely by a person who is black, or someone who has mastered certain styles, themes that speak to the black experience? Which means it could be anybody who's doing black art. Is that black art?
Yes.
So I just wondering from the great minds assembled here.
It's a big tent.
That's happening with Native Americans. White people are usurping their art. It's happening with Asians. They're usurping their art. So
You can define it by, for example, saying that it is black art because it is produced by a black person. That's one way. You can also say it is black art because the content speaks, the subject matter speaks to black people. And do we want to be prescriptive? Do we want to actually say that this does not qualify as black art because it wasn't produced by a black person? What if a black person were to produce art of white people? Would that be black art anymore? Would it qualify? One of the problems of elision, of pushing people back, of not admitting people into the academy, the museums, by curators who happen to be of a different race, is because of this claim, which has since been, kind of defined as being very lazy, that we don't understand what it's all about. That, the work looks good, but we don't understand it, therefore we cannot curate it. That was then. Now we also have a group of artists who are from the diaspora, who are in fact doing so much here in curating art. Okuyenwenzo, for example, Salah Hassan, Oluokwibe, and quite a number of them. But of course, it didn't take long before the criticism also emerged that group also has its own group, a circle of people that it kind of circulates its exhibitions amongst. But the point is this, that the establishment of a journal by a window is one of the best things that have happened to African art in the last 10 years plus. Other than African arts, which continuously has been the staple of contemporary art, we don't have too many journals. There is the International Review of African American Art that has been on, since God knows when. So, in addition to what Wale said, I think we also need to float journals, float magazines, have presence online. The web is a very, very good kind of place to be, and for a very small a part of the cost that will take you to do a journal, you can do it online. And so, if one of the things that probably will come from this is to have a kind of presence where there be some kind of networking, that would have been well worth the efforts.
Well, I would like to get closing comments from each of our guests, because this has been a most extraordinary exchange. And I do know that several of our guests here, our panelists, do have long travels ahead of them. Daniel Parker, closing thoughts?
Buy art, buy art, buy art. If you can, write about art, write about art, write about art. Promote our art.
Dr. Benedict?
I think we try and imbibe the culture of recognizing our own. People, or many people, so to say, many people, they don't, recognize their own. They prefer something, outside of their own culture. And if we do that, nobody will write our, our history for ourselves, for us. So therefore, let's start from there. Let us recognize our own. Let us write our own history. Let us respect our own people. If we do that, others will respect us. Others will, form the, the culture. I mean, to, share with us and also understand us more. Because if we don't understand, if we don't recognize ourselves, nobody will, will respect us, and nobody will understand us. So that's the way I see it.
Lisa Gaines McDonald will allow Grandbaba to close.
As a collector, own what you, buy what you like. The value is what you see in it. And I look at in terms of what I've purchased, whether it's been in Bahia, in Benin, it all has a common theme, and it all builds on whether you say traditional art or whatever, religion. It all has some cultural history built into it. And if you want more information on diasporism so that you can learn about local collectors and local artists, you can see me, or you can see Patrick that's sitting there, or you can see Lee. Thank you.
And Dr. Jiggy.
It was Tino Achebe who gave some kind of bent to the Igbo proverb that until the lions have their own historian, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. I will close on that.
Thank you so very much. Yes.
Before we're dismissed, I'd like to introduce some of the artists.